Late November 1941. The Moscow sector. The front has buckled. The air is shredded by the howl of diving Stukas. A whistle, a deafening crack. The frozen earth erupts from a direct hit. The shockwave splinters the timber revetments of the trenches. Infantry huddle into the frozen ground. The line is disintegrating under the relentless pressure of enemy armor. German tank tracks are grinding the first line of defense into the dirt. Knocked out anti-tank guns are ablaze. The stench of burnt TNT catches in the throat. It hurts to breathe. The cold cuts to the bone. Another heavy, high-explosive bomb levels a signaler's position. The copper telephone wire snaps. Comms are dead. Command is blind. Catastrophe is imminent. The enemy is clawing toward the capital. The tank brigade's command post is dug in deep. The log roofing groans under the nearby cannonade. A dim kerosene lamp carves the CO's haggard face out of the gloom. He leans his heavy hands on a sprawling topographic map. The map is littered with red X's over grid squares. Lost battalions. Wiped out companies. There are no reserves left. The last rifle brigade was shattered an hour ago near an unnamed hill. The radio operator screams hoarsely into his headset, trying to raise the front line through the crackle of static. No answer. The silence on the airwaves grates on the nerves worse than a direct artillery barrage. The brigade commander clenches his fists until his knuckles crack. His gaze falls on a narrow bottleneck of a forest road in the map's left sector. Siding number 17. If the German column breaks through here, they'll be in the deep rear of the entire defending force. That'll be the end. Total encirclement. A roadblock is needed in the column's path. The choice falls on the only heavy machine to survive the morning's engagement. Senior Lieutenant Kravchenko steps into the bunker. Tank soot is etched deep into his face. His winter gear reeks of diesel and cordite. He stops at the table. The CO raises eyes, bloodshot from lack of sleep. He looks at him heavily, then averts his gaze. The commander knows exactly the price of the order he's about to give. It's a direct order to die. Siding number 17, the CO says, his voice dry. A short finger jabs the map. The German vanguard will come through here. Kravchenko studies the terrain in silence. Coniferous forest. A narrow, unpaved dirt road. The marshes on the flanks haven't frozen solid yet. Heavy armor will bog down there. The enemy will be moving in a tight march column. Block the road, the CO continues harshly. Hold the line to the last shell. Don't expect reinforcements. There is no falling back. Kravchenko nods slowly. No questions. The cold professionalism of a veteran leaves no room for panic. The senior lieutenant pulls his sidearm. He cycles the action. The metal clicks dryly in the silence of the bunker. A lubricated round seats into the chamber. Kravchenko engages the safety and holsters the weapon. Request permission to carry out the order. The CO shakes his hand in silence. The grip is brief, dry. On the edge of the woods, a massive hunk of steel sits cooling. The KV-1. A behemoth of Soviet tank engineering. 47 tons of rolled steel. The blunt, angular snout of the turret blends into the encroaching twilight. The crew is already working around the machine. They know the mission. The engine is killed, so the sound doesn't give them away, but the transmission housing still holds the faint warmth of the recent march. Kravchenko approaches the tank. He hops onto the fender. Load a double combat load, he barks into the open, heavy turret hatch. Down in the cramped gut of the tank, The loader acknowledges the command in silence. The grueling, back-breaking work begins. Sleds piled high with shells are dragged to the tank. The 76mm rounds are heavy. Each shell is a massive hunk of ice-cold metal. The tankers work with bare hands. The coarse canvas of their tunics slides against the frozen steel. The skin on their fingers cracks in the bitter cold. Dark blood smears the brass casings. The pain only makes them move faster. Suddenly, a howl cuts the air. A stray bomber drops a load 100 yards from the tank. The earth shudders. The loader loses his footing. A heavy, armor-piercing shell slips from his numb hands. Kravchenko lunges. He catches the shell just inches from the armor. He snaps his fingernails, but holds the weight. A short exhale. The shell goes down the hatch. The work continues. Anti-aircraft batteries open up a box barrage. The roar hammers the eardrums. Tracers streak into the black sky in rapid, dashed lines. The din is deafening. The loader rhythmically passes down the remaining rounds. The standard racks in the turret are filled to absolute capacity. Extra shells are shoved right onto the ribbed floor of the fighting compartment. There's almost no room left to move. The interior is packed with explosives to the limit. A direct hit from anti-tank artillery would ignite the arsenal and vaporize the machine in a split second. The frost sharpens. The temperature is plummeting. Breath turns into thick steam that instantly settles as jagged rime on the frozen armor. Kravchenko drops heavily into the commander's seat. The heavy hatch above his head slams shut with a dull clang. The armored lock is bolted tight. The steel box completely severs them from the outside world. Now there is only them, the frozen armor, and the mission. "Crank it!" Kravchenko's voice crackles over the intercom. The driver mashes the starter button. The diesel engine shudders. The starter whines. The engine spits a thick cloud of blue-grey smoke, chokes, and suddenly explodes into a deafening roar. Hundreds of horsepower lurch the mass forward. The wide tracks bite into the frozen earth. The armored beast rolls into the thick darkness of the winter forest, toward siding number 17. The night devours 47 tons of steel. The diesel hums at low revs. The exhaust is muffled. The heavy machine creeps toward the neutral zone. The tracks crush frozen brushwood. Dry branches snap. The sound carries far. The distance closes. Ahead is the crossroads at siding number 17, the ambush site. The driver pulls the left lever. The steering clutch grinds. The tank snaps the trunks of young pines. It crawls into the thicket, takes its position. The engine dies. A dead silence follows. The cold hits like a physical blow. The temperature drops to 32 below. The crew leaves the warm turret. The tankers turn into laborers. The fortification of the position begins. It's a near impossible task. The frozen clay rings like iron under the shovels. The earth has turned to concrete. The loader swings a heavy crowbar with all his might. Sparks fly as steel hits the frozen ground. Only pathetic chips break off. They need a deep defilade before dawn. The hull must be hidden. Leaving the machine on the surface means being executed at point-blank range. The strikes of the pickaxe ring in their ears. Every inch is a battle. The loader spits thick saliva. It tastes of blood. Capillaries are bursting from the strain. A wide shovel scrapes against stones. Soil is tossed onto the berm. The height of the earthen wall grows slowly. The night feels eternal. There are no stars, only a low, black sky pressing down on their shoulders. Breath comes in thick clouds of vapor. Sweat stings their eyes. Their tunics get soaked. The fabric instantly turns into a crust of ice. Hands are rubbed raw. The wooden shovel handles are slick. Blood freezes to the wood. The pain is ignored. The pace of work increases. Every shovelful of earth increases their chance of survival. The driver swings a heavy pick. A strike. Another. The blade bounces off a hidden boulder. His wrist spasms from the brutal recoil. Joints crack. "Deeper," Commander Kravchenko rasps.
"Hide the road wheels completely."
The clatter of metal echoes through the woods. It's a deadly risk. Enemy patrols are combing the area. Tension tightens the throat. Suddenly, the crunch of snow cuts the work short. Foreign footsteps. A German recon patrol walks right onto the flank of the position. Range, 30 yards. 3 silhouettes in Feldgrau greatcoats are sharp against the snow. Weapons at the ready. Stopping is equivalent to failure. No explanation is needed. Kravchenko levels his SMG. A short burst rips the night silence. Lead slams into the chest of the lead scout. The enemy falls backward. The second scout levels his carbine. The loader drops his crowbar. He grabs a heavy spanner. A leap. A blow with the heavy metal crushes the helmet. The German slumps into a snowbank. The third enemy tries to scream. The driver's shot cuts the sound short. The bullet tears through his throat. Silence returns. Blood soaks into the crust in black patches. "Dump the bodies in the crater. Cover them with snow," Kravchenko commands. His voice is steady. His breathing hasn't even hitched. The banality of death. The bodies are stomped into the snow at the bottom of the deep bomb crater. Branches are piled on top. White powder is shoveled over them. The blood is scuffed away with boots. Nature hides the traces of the brief slaughter. The enemy must not find the missing men before the main engagement begins. Otherwise, the element of surprise is gone. Time is running out. Work resumes with redoubled fury. The pit deepens. The massive tank slowly slides into the dugout trench. The steel hull disappears behind the earthen berm. Only the heavy turret remains on the surface. The camouflaging begins. Whitewash is mixed in a bucket with melted snow. Cold rags are dipped into the white slush. The crew slathers the frozen armor. The white paint goes on in uneven layers. It freezes instantly. The skin on their fingers cracks from chemical burns and the frost.
The camouflage process is brought to perfection. The lime bites into the pores. Fingers lose all sensation. White streaks cover the turret, the gun mantlet, the hull cheeks. The sharp angles of the heavy tank are visually broken. The silhouette blurs. The barrel of the 76mm gun is wrapped in white cloth. The muzzle is shielded from a stray glance. The wide track marks are meticulously swept away with fir branches. The earthen berm is doused liberally with water. In the bitter frost, the wet clay quickly turns into a solid ice shell. An armor-piercing shell won't punch through this barrier on the first try. Thick pine logs are laid on top. They are chopped with heavy sapper axes far from the position. The thud of the axes is hidden behind gusts of wind. The logs are dragged by hand. Backs groan under the impossible weight. 4 men harness themselves to a raw trunk. Muscles tear. Step by step, the timber is hauled onto the armor. Each log is extra protection. The heavy wood is laid over the engine compartment, shielding the vulnerable radiator grills. The logs are then generously dusted with snow. The night retreats. A gray haze creeps between the trunks. 47 tons of cast metal dissolve into the winter landscape. The tank ceases to exist as a technical unit.
It becomes an organic part of the frozen forest. The invisible shield is ready. The crew collapses from sheer exhaustion. Muscles seize in brutal cramps. Their uniforms are stiff as boards from frozen sweat. Faces are gray from wild fatigue and caustic lime. Kravchenko inspects the position. Not a single stray shadow. Not a single glint. The field of fire is perfect. The sector covers the narrow road completely. The enemy won't be able to maneuver. The mire on the shoulders makes a bypass impossible. The trap snapped shut before the victim even appeared. The commander drops into the turret. Last one in. He bolts the heavy hatch. The darkness of the fighting compartment swallows the tankers.
The air inside has cooled to the outside temperature. It reeks of machine oil, frozen metal, cordite, and unwashed bodies. The loader leans heavily against the gun breech. His hands shake from the monstrous overexertion. Raw, bloody blisters pulse with a dull ache. He closes his eyes for a second. "Watch the optics. Assign sectors." The commander's voice cuts through the half-slumber. There will be no rest. A lapse in vigilance means instant death. The loader's hand habitually rests on the cold brass of the first AP shell. The metal burns with cold through his toughened skin. Ahead lie endless hours of icy waiting. The engineering task is done. The ambush is set. The kill zone is formed. The lines of retreat have been cut, deliberately and forever. Now there is only icy steel, absolute silence, and the encroaching elite armada of the enemy. The line is ready. Dawn breaks as a murky gray streak. A frosty haze wraps tightly around the tree trunks. The temperature inside the steel box has equalized with the outside, 32 below. The steel sucks the last scraps of warmth from their exhausted bodies. The crew has turned into ice statues. Breath settles as thick, jagged rime on the upturned collars of their greatcoats. The loader sits motionless on his haunches by the ammo racks. His numb fingers are locked onto the cold brass of the first armor-piercing round. The weight of the shell drags at his arms. His muscles ache from the brutal static tension. He can't change position. Any extra rustle in the echoing void of the turret sounds like a bell toll. The weight is unbearable. Time thickens. Every minute stretches into hours of agonizing physical suffering. The silence presses against their inflamed eardrums with growing force. A faint, barely perceptible vibration begins to transmit through the frozen earth. At first, it's just a slight tremor in the fingertips pressed to the metal floor. Then, the rhythm intensifies. The sound gradually gains density. The distant clatter of heavy tracks. The strained, low growl of dozens of high-performance engines. The enemy is approaching. The mechanical armada is shattering the forest silence. The gunner glues himself to the frosted eyepiece of the optic. The crosshairs roam over the empty forest clearing. 10 long minutes pass. Out of the gray morning mist, the first angular silhouette emerges. Then a second. A third. The elite Panzer vanguard pulls onto the narrow dirt road. The machines are moving in a tight march column. The turret hatches are open. The German commanders are standing waist-high. The enemy is absolutely confident in their safety. The forward scouts failed to report any threat. "Range, 800, the gunner rasps. His voice cracks from the strain. His finger rests spasmodically on the trigger. His back arches in a tight bow. "Target in sight." "Hold."
Senior Lieutenant Kravchenko's voice is steady. Let them get close. Wait. The commander watches intently through the narrow slit of the periscope. The terrain is clear. A narrow clearing. To the right, the unfrozen quagmire begins. To the left stands a solid wall of thick coniferous forest. The shoulders are piled with deep snowdrifts. The lead enemy machine crosses an invisible line. The distance is melting away. 700 meters. 600. 500. The black crosses on the gray armor are clearly visible. The gunner's nerves are fraying. Heavy, ragged breathing fills the intercom. Commander, they're going to pass the sector. Let's go! Shut it. Hold the target. Kravchenko cuts the panic short. The commander has become a single calculating mechanism. An iron will suppresses natural human fear. No useless emotions. Only dry ballistics. The column must enter the kill zone in its entirety. Finally, the tail-end half-track emerges from the mist. A squad of infantry is packed onto its armor. The enemy column is fully stretched out on the straight, open stretch. Suddenly, the steady rhythm of movement breaks. The lead tank slows down abruptly. The steel tracks grind to a halt. The machine freezes, just 150 yards from the camouflaged firing position. An officer in a black uniform raises a gloved hand. The engines drop to idle. The officer slowly brings field glasses to his eyes. The lenses are aimed directly at the snow-covered mound, where the multi-ton Soviet machine is hidden. The officer stares into the white void for a long time. Then he reaches for his radio mic. He's made us, the loader exhales. A drop of sweat falls onto the frosted metal floor. The wait is over. A split second decides the outcome. Lead tank, fire! Kravchenko barks the order. The gunner mashes the firing pedal. The cramped space inside the steel turret instantly explodes. The deafening crack of the tank gun mercilessly hammers their ears. The mighty physical force of the recoil throws the heavy barrel back. A hot wave of scorched propellant gases hits the tankers in the face. The loader acts on pure muscle reflex. The empty, smoking casing clatters onto the ribbed floor. Heavy hands snatch a new shell. Metal grinds as it slides into the breach. The massive breech block slams shut, locking the bore. The heavy, armor-piercing slug covers the 150 yards in an imperceptible fraction of a second. Impact. The face-hardened frontal armor of the lead German tank shatters with a sickening screech. The shell punches through the fighting compartment. Inside, the full combat load detonates instantly. A monstrous internal explosion shears the multi-ton turret off its ring. The mangled hunk of metal is tossed high into the air. A roaring pillar of fire tears through the morning mist. Rear vehicle, fire! The gun barks a second time. The machine shudders. The AP shot strikes the engine compartment of the rear half-track with surgical precision. The fuel tanks erupt. A powerful shockwave mercilessly tosses the German infantry into the deep snowdrifts. The road is blocked. The column is boxed in on the narrow stretch. The way forward is barred by the flaming hulk of the lead tank. The way back is cut by the burning transport. To the right and left lies the icy mire. The methodical mechanical work of annihilation begins. HE, center mass, fire! The enemy is completely blinded by the sudden and brutal strike. Primal panic instantly shatters the strict march order. German drivers desperately try to turn their machines around in the narrow corridor. Steel tracks scrape helplessly against the frozen clay. Tanks slide into deep ditches. They stall. They collide armor to armor. The infantry scrambles in terror through the acrid black smoke. The Soviet tank's Hull machine gun begins spitting long bursts. Lead unceremoniously mows down the frantic figures. The Germans are firing blind, not understanding where the death is coming from. The fire is coming from an invisible, fortified point. The camouflage is working perfectly. The slaughter of the elite column turns into a methodical assembly line of death. The movement inside the scorching box merges into a single mechanical rhythm. The loader loses track of time. His exhausted body has finally turned into a steel piston. Grab, pivot, ram. 76 millimeters of death are incredibly heavy. His back muscles burn with an unbearable fire. The coarse canvas of his tunic is soaked through with acrid, cold sweat and black, oily soot. The skin on his toughened palms splits from the constant friction. Thick, dark blood mixes with the gun grease, lubricating the cold brass casings. Physical pain is completely ignored. Only the sharp clang of the heavy breech matters. The block drops. The gun is ready. A short command. Fire! The brutal recoil of the gun throws the massive breech block back within millimeters of his face. A hot wave hits his lungs. The cordite fumes quickly and densely pack the cramped turret. The exhaust fan can't keep up with that volume of gas. There is absolutely nothing to breathe. Oxygen is being burned off rapidly. The tankers cough up black soot. Their eyes water from the stinging smoke. The narrow periscope slits are quickly filmed over with gray grime. The commander's hand habitually and sharply wipes the glass with a dirty rag. The clockwork mechanism continues to run without stopping. Outside, a methodical massacre is unfolding. The elite panzer vanguard of the Wehrmacht is boxed into a narrow kill zone. Mangled half-tracks are burning hot. Thick pillars of greasy black smoke rise over the frozen forest. The German infantry has fallen into a blind animal panic. Soldiers frantically leap from flaming vehicles. They try to take cover in the deep snow. They run for the safety of the woods, ditching their weapons. They are mercilessly mown down by a rain of lead. The coaxial machine gun works in short, exceptionally disciplined bursts. No emotion. Only the bone-dry control of ammunition expenditure. Range 200. HE, infantry, left flank, Commander Kravchenko rasps. His intonation is completely flat. Only lethal exhaustion and cold metal remain in his voice. Ready, the loader coughs. He spits soot-blackened saliva right onto the hot, ribbed floor. Fire! Another high-explosive shell rips the frozen earth along with the men. Grisly shreds of flesh and scraps of gray overcoats hang from the shattered pine branches. The snow around the road turns red and melts quickly from the raging fires. The enemy begins to come to their senses. The initial deep shock is replaced by the desperation of a cornered animal. The surviving German medium tanks frantically rotate their angular turrets. They try to find the invisible shooter's position by the muzzle flashes. Short, hysterical commands rip through the enemy radio net. The enemy gun barrels turn almost in sync toward the snow-covered hill. A massive return fire begins. An armor-piercing shell streaks through the frosty air with a wild howl. A monstrous impact shakes 47 tons of Soviet steel. The roar hits their eardrums like a sledgehammer. A piercing ring erupts in the crew's ears, instantly fading into a thick, crushing, cotton wool silence. A shower of white, frozen lime and sharp metal spalling rains down from the turret ceiling. But the frontal armor holds. The slope of the thick steel plate works perfectly. The enemy shell ricochets with a foul shriek, screaming high into the gray winter sky. The enemy failed to punch through on the first try. Range 40. AP on the lead in the group. The commander's steady voice cuts through the ringing in the gunner's ears. Another clang of the breech. Flash. Recoil. The enemy immediately receives a lethal counterstrike. A German medium tank erupts into a bright gasoline torch. The crew doesn't even have time to pop the hatches. A massive magazine detonation rips the riveted hull apart from the inside. The glow of the massive fire illuminates the icy hell of the crossroads. Enemy shells are landing in tighter groups now. A second heavy hit. A third. The machine shakes as if in a violent fever. The metal hums continuously under the hail of armor-piercing steel. Another enemy shot strikes the heavy gun mantlet dead on. A spray of bright sparks showers the vision slits. The loader is thrown violently against the iron internal bulkhead. He hits the back of his head hard against the metal. Consciousness flickers for a brief second, but his bloodied hands reflexively find the cold casing of a new shell. His body rises on its own, obeying an instinct drilled into him on the firing ranges. The movement continues without a hitch. Stopping means certain death. Inside the tank, the temperature climbed relentlessly. The white-hot metal of the breech block exhaled a stifling heat. The sharp contrast between the hull's freezing armor and the scorching gun sent painful spasms through the crew's muscles. 250, HE, gun crew direct front. A dry correction interrupted the groan of metal. German artillerymen were desperately trying to deploy a heavy anti-tank gun right on the icy road. The crew feverishly spread the trails, but they weren't fast enough. The high-explosive round shredded the gun into jagged fragments. Mangled metal tore into the crowd of prone infantry. The road finally dissolved into a solid, impassable morass of mud, blood, and burning iron. The ammo rack was slowly but surely emptying. Spent brass casings rolled across the floor with a deafening clatter, burning legs even through the thick, rough leather of boots. Space inside was becoming critically tight. It was impossible to toss the red-hot casings outside. The hatches were battened down tight. The turret was turning into a silent steel tomb, filled to the brim with toxic carbon monoxide. Every breath was a hard-fought battle. Lungs burned. The driver sat motionless below, his field of vision minimal. He felt only the slight vibration of the hull and absorbed the dull thuds of enemy rounds. His hands were locked onto the steel control levers, knuckles white from the grip. His legs had gone completely numb on the stiff pedals. The machine had to be ready for a sudden lunge at any second. If the position were flanked, they would have to brutally break the formation with their heavy tracks. But there was no order to move, only the order to hold the line at any cost. And the crew held it, methodically grinding the enemy elite into bloody steel dust. The sound of bullets drummed against the armor like heavy hail. It was a symphony of destruction, played on raw nerves and the limits of human endurance. The calculated meat grinder had hit maximum RPM. Another shell was rammed into the breach. The death machine did not misfire. The shock of the enemy command quickly evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculated fury. Elite German officers realized the bitter truth. Their lightning advance hadn't been stopped by a layered defense line, but was being methodically annihilated by a single Soviet heavy tank. The enemy changed tactics. Surviving armor hastily reversed, hiding behind the bends of the narrow forest track. The road was deadlocked by burning wrecks. A direct tank breakthrough was impossible. Enemy command issued a harsh order: destroy the Soviet roadblock at any cost. A thick, white shroud soon hung over the scarred crossroads. The enemy generously blanketed no man's land with smoke canisters. Acrid chemical fog clung to the frozen ground, mixing with the thick, black soot of burning fuel tanks. Visibility dropped to absolute zero. From this dense, gray mess, specialized assault groups silently emerged. This wasn't ordinary line infantry. This was an elite sabotage unit, specialists in destroying bunkers and heavy armor. The soldiers carried heavy bundles of anti-tank grenades and powerful shaped charges. It became terrifyingly quiet inside the turret. The gunner squinted until his inflamed eyes ached unbearably. Through the thick plumes of smoke, blurred gray silhouettes began to flicker elusively. "Infantry! Dead ahead!" he rasped through a parched throat. Kravchenko didn't pull his face away from the narrow vision slit. "Machine gun! Short bursts!" The heavy barrel of the coaxial machine gun had long been glowing a dull red. The hot metal clicked from the temperature shift. Lead volleys shredded the smokescreen with a loud, dry crackle. Figures in gray greatcoats fell into the deep, blood-stained snow, but new soldiers immediately took their place. The enemy completely ignored their heavy losses. The sabotage unit fanatically pushed forward, skillfully using the Soviet guns' blind spots. They hid behind the burning hulls of wrecked vehicles and dashed from crater to crater. The distance closed with terrifying speed. 80 meters, 50, 30. German regimental artillery opened up a blistering barrage. A dense hail of HE mortar rounds blanketed the Soviet heavyweights' camouflaged position. The frozen earth literally boiled. Massive, heavy clods of icy clay drummed against the steel armor with a deafening roar. Ancient pines around the earthen revetment shattered into jagged splinters. Suddenly, the world around them exploded in blinding white flame. A heavy 150mm high-explosive shell hit the edge of the icy earthen berm dead on. A monstrous shockwave shook the 47 tons of cast metal. The tank was jolted violently in its pit. Inside the turret, every emergency light bulb instantly burst. Absolute, deafening darkness followed. A dense, painful ringing hit their eardrums, harshly drowning out all other sounds. In that same second, a massive shell fragment screamed into the frontal plate. The fragment didn't penetrate the thick armor, but it found a weak point in the design. The monstrous impact hit the bottom edge of the vision slit. The thick, bulletproof glass of the triplex couldn't withstand the colossal kinetic pressure. The block shattered into thousands of tiny, sharp shards with a sickening crunch. Razor-sharp edges sliced into the driver's exposed face. Pain blinded him instantly. Hot, thick blood immediately flooded his eyes, flowing in a heavy stream down his chin and soaking the thick wool collar of his winter uniform. Thick, heavy red drops fell rhythmically onto the steel clutch levers. "Driver!" Kravchenko yelled, his voice barely breaking through the continuous roar of explosions. "Alive!" The driver spat out black blood, choking. "Eyes are flooded. Can't see a damn thing." His numb hands slid desperately over the smooth metal of the levers. The sticky liquid robbed his fingers of any reliable grip. The driver frantically tried to wipe his face with a dirty wool sleeve, but the coarse, stiff fabric only mercilessly scraped the deep, jagged wounds. Pain surged through his body like a powerful electric current. While the blinded driver fought his injury, the assault group crossed the final meters of dead space. The saboteurs lunged directly into the tank trench. The most terrifying stage of the battle began. Direct physical contact between enemy infantry and the armored hull. Locked in their iron box,
The tankers clearly heard the chilling scrape of hobnailed boots on the steel roof. The Germans nimbly scrambled onto the engine compartment, feverishly searching for vulnerable radiator vents and trying to plant heavy explosives right under the turret ring. The sharp thud of heavy entrenching tools against the battened-down hatches echoed in the crew's ears like a hollow funeral knell. The enemy screamed guttural commands, demanding surrender. The cramped space of the machine instantly shrank to the size of a narrow iron coffin. Air was critically scarce, replaced by the suffocating smell of burnt powder, acrid sweat, and fresh, warm blood. "Hostiles on the hull! Setting charges!" the loader stated flatly. There wasn't a hint of panic in his raw voice, only the dry statement of a lethal threat. Kravchenko made the only right decision. They had to leave the camouflaged firing position immediately. Otherwise, in a few short seconds, the directed blast of a shaped charge would punch through the thin turret roof, and the crew would burn alive. "Driver, hard reverse! Crush 'em!" The order cracked like a short, sharp whip. The heavily wounded driver didn't need eyes. He felt the dimensions of his giant machine through his skin. Trained muscles worked purely on reflexes hammered in on the proving grounds. His left leg pressed the stiff main clutch pedal with superhuman effort.
His right hand, slick with blood, slammed the stubborn reverse lever into the slot with a loud crunch. The heavy diesel engine roared under the strain. A thick column of blue-gray smoke erupted from the exhaust pipes. The steel hull shudders from the monstrous internal tension. 47 tons of cast steel lunged backward. The machine bellowed as it reversed, its wide steel tracks biting mercilessly into the icy vertical walls of the revetment. The frozen earth collapsed downward with a crash. The sudden violent jolt backward caught the experienced saboteurs off guard. The German infantry couldn't hold on to the smooth, icy armor. The soldiers fell off with screams, dropping straight into the narrow trench under the heavy, clanking tracks. The frozen, hard ground left no chance for escape. The multi-ton steel mass cold-bloodedly ground human bodies. The dull, sickening crunch of breaking bones instantly mixed with the deafening roar of the revved engine. The tank broke out of its own prepared ambush with an unbearable screech. The tracks squelched as they crushed the wounded enemies, mixing gray greatcoats with dirty red snow. The blind, desperate rage of the German elite special forces was shattered against ruthless mechanical power. Kravchenko braked the tank hard. The machine ground to a halt at a new firing line, only 20 meters from the destroyed trench. The sabotage group had been completely wiped out in brutal close-quarters combat. Enemy blood quickly froze on the steel road wheels. Inside the turret, breathing became nearly impossible. The fan screeches as it circulated acrid carbon monoxide. The loader violently tore at the collar of his dirty tunic, catching poisoned air with a parched mouth. The gunner was glued to the spare triplex, his right eye completely swollen shut from a heavy impact against the sight. The driver breathed heavily and raggedly below, dropping thick red droplets onto the iron floor. The crew was concussed and exhausted to the absolute limit of human endurance, but the heavy machine stood like a monolith. The engine ran smoothly. "Sights! Gun!" the commander demanded. The loader's bloodied hands, beaten to a pulp, shoved the icy brass into the hot breech again. The massive breech block clacked shut. The shot tore through the thick smoke with a roar. The tank continued to snarl back with aimed fire. The enemy armada still couldn't take a single step forward along the narrow road. The iron line had not been surrendered. The roar of battle suddenly cut off, followed by a heavy, ringing silence. An operational pause. The enemy pulled their broken assault groups back, leaving dozens of mutilated bodies on the snow.
The soundscape was now filled only with the dull crackle of burning diesel fuel and short, dry snaps. German snipers at work. Lead bullets methodically and spitefully struck the cooling armor of the Soviet machine, searching for vision slits and trying to knock out the remaining triplexes. Before the heavy tank's firing position lay a vast graveyard of mangled metal. Dozens of enemy armor wrecks smoldered with thick, oily smoke. The narrow forest road had turned into a solid crater, boiling with fires. Black, greasy soot settled in a thick layer on the white snow. The behemoth of the Soviet heavyweight, the Kliment Voroshilov one, stood motionless. The whitewash had completely burned off or flaked away under the monstrous hits, exposing the raw hull metal. The thick barrel of the 76mm gun was horribly blackened from severe overheating during continuous fire. The frontal armor was a scarred moonscape, pitted with dozens of deep craters. Enemy armor-piercing rounds had gouged out huge chunks of tough alloy steel. Weld seams had cracked along the entire length of the hull, but held the heavy armor plates together. One massive road wheel had been blown off entirely by a direct hit from a large-caliber HE shell.
The thick steel track sagged heavily. Any sudden maneuver now threatened to throw the tracks immediately. The machine had absorbed a colossal tonnage of kinetic energy. By all laws of physics, the metal should have snapped or crumbled into pieces. The armor held. It had become the physical limit of endurance. Inside the cramped turret, a thick blue haze hung. Powder fumes soaked into lungs. The crew was heavily concussed by a series of incredibly close, heavy shell bursts. The tankers' faces had turned into solid black masks of ingrained soot, burnt engine oil, and clotted blood. Senior Lieutenant Kravchenko, slowly, overcoming wild pain in his muscles, lowered himself to the ribbed floor. His movements were stiff. His body refused to obey the brain's commands. The commander pulled out a rough individual first aid kit, tearing the thick fabric with his teeth with a dry snap. Kravchenko tightly bandaged the driver's face, mutilated by glass shards. Blood pulsed out of the deep, jagged wounds, and the stiff bandage was instantly soaked with hot, red liquid. The driver groaned through tightly clenched jaws, his numb, white fingers still firmly gripping the steel control levers. The man was ready to lunge the scarred machine forward at the first command. The commander raised his inflamed eyes, surveying the interior of the fighting compartment. Outside, the multi-ton armor hasn't been breached, but inside, a hidden death lurked. The colossal external pressure from constant hits had severely deformed the armor plates. Heavy internal steel rivets couldn't withstand the monstrous tension and had snapped off the walls with a ringing crunch. The sheared, faceted chunks of metal flew through the enclosed cabin faster than bullets, ricocheting with a scream off the massive gun breech and leaving deep, jagged furrows on the internal iron bulkheads. Sharp metal had flown millimeters from their heads. The crew had survived by blind, physical chance. The tank's mechanisms groaned with every dull revolution of the idling diesel engine. It was time for the Iron Reckoning, an assessment of remaining resources before a new strike. "Loader, report ammo." Kravchenko's voice sounded dull and flat, as if pushing through a thick concrete wall. The loader heavily rose to his knees. His hands were one solid, torn blister. He blindly fumbled with bloodied palms over the empty iron ammo racks, his fingers striking only the icy metal of empty slots. Spent brass casings covered the entire floor in a thick, clinking layer. He had to move right over them. "Empty,"
he rasps hoarsely, swallowing viscous saliva that tasted of soot. He coughed heavily and searched further, finally feeling cold, heavy cylinders at the very bottom of the reserve rack.
3 AP, 2 HE. That's it. We're done.
The number fell like a stone into the turret's poisoned air. 5 shots. That was the price of their lives. 5 shells against the fresh reserves of an entire German division. It wouldn't even last for 1 minute of intense combat. The machine gun drums were also empty. Kravchenko slowly ran a dirty palm over the icy breech of the gun. The steel was cooling fast in the frost. The engine ran at minimum RPM, economically burning the last drops of diesel. There was enough fuel for exactly 1 short lunge. The radio was smashed to bits. The tank was completely cut off from HQ, isolated in an endless ocean of enemy steel. The cold began to aggressively penetrate their thick army greatcoats again. The temperature was dropping rapidly. The blood on the driver's bandages froze, turning into a stiff, dark crust. The loader leaned his broad back helplessly against the cold armor, his chest heaving. Every breath echoed with a stabbing pain under broken ribs. The gunner stared blindly into the only surviving spare triplex, his right eye completely closed by a massive purple hematoma.
The optics transmitted a terrifying and inevitable reality. The enemy was bringing up heavy weapons. At the edge of the frozen forest, crews were hastily deploying the long barrels of 88mm anti-aircraft guns. This gun could punch through the Soviet heavyweight's frontal armor with the first shot. The enemy had decided to solve the problem radically. "Shell in the breech, load AP." The commander's dry, emotionless order broke the heavy silence. The loader nodded obediently. He took the heavy piece of lethal metal, which slid along the steel guides with a screech. The massive breech block dropped with a deafening clack. The gun was ready for battle. "Wait for my command. We're letting them get point blank." The tankers understood the reality without unnecessary words. 5 shells. And then a silent hand-to-hand struggle would begin. The iron tally was settled. The balance was finally struck. The crew accepted the harsh mathematics of imminent death with the icy calm of machines. Outside, the low hum of dozens of revved engines rose again. The enemy armada prepared for the final lunge. The distance closed. There were almost no shells left, only measly scraps. 5 heavy armor-piercing slugs lay on the frozen bottom of the reserve ammo rack. Outside, an icy gray gloom was rapidly thickening. The enemy was fundamentally changing their battle tactics. Elite German infantry hastily pulled back, taking cover behind the smoking black wrecks of burnt tanks. A pedantic, purely professional preparation for the execution of the stationary Soviet machine began. At the edge of the frozen winter forest, heavy metal clanked hollowly. Enemy gunners rolled 88mm anti-aircraft guns into direct fire positions. The long, predatory barrels slowly lowered into a horizontal position with a menacing creak. Gunners in gray greatcoats calculatedly turned the shiny hand wheels of the optical sights. The appearance of the 88s meant an absolute, guaranteed end for any armored vehicle. A heavy, high-velocity shell would punch through 47 tons of cast Soviet steel with the very first hit. The range was absolutely lethal. It was impossible to hide or maneuver. The thick track was hopelessly severed. A road wheel had been blown clean off by HE. The heavy tank had finally turned into a stationary steel target at a pre-sighted crossroads. The crew knew the tactical and technical specs of the enemy's guns perfectly. There were no chances of survival in a direct fire engagement. The air inside the cramped turret became dense, heavy, saturated with the smell of the inevitable. Death took on a perfectly clear physical form, looking straight into the narrow vision slits through the deep black holes of the German barrels. Suddenly, the dead silence of the shattered internal comms was pierced by a sharp, painful crackle. The miraculously surviving onboard radio unexpectedly came to life. Wires severed by shrapnel sparked. The speaker rasped strainingly. Through dense waves of static interference, the distant, heavily distorted voice of Brigade HQ broke through. 07, this is base. How do you copy? The brigade commander's voice had heavy feedback, but a desperate, almost impossible hope rang clearly in it. Command no longer believed that the forward screen still existed or was capable of fighting. Senior Lieutenant Kravchenko slowly reached for the black ebony PTT switch. His frozen fingers, heavily coated in clotted blood, squeezed the cold plastic of the microphone with great effort. Base, this is 07. Copy you fair. The tank commander's voice sounded steady, hollow, and completely devoid of emotion. 07, you have completed the objective. The enemy column is effectively halted. I am authorizing an immediate withdrawal. Repeat, authorizing a breakout to friendly lines. Abandon the destroyed position.
I expect your crew at the secondary defense line. The brigade commander's words fell heavily into the cramped, smoke-filled space of the turret. This was a direct, official chance to survive. Command was giving them the legal right to save their lives after completing an impossible mission. The exhausted crew froze. The loader stopped his bloodied hand right over the last cold shell. The heavily wounded driver slowly raised his mutilated face from the steel levers. A second of absolute, ringing silence hung in the acrid powder smoke. A hard choice between guaranteed life and voluntary duty crystallized in the freezing air. Kravchenko stares fixedly through the narrow slit of the sole surviving vision block. He sees the tactical situation for what it is: merciless. If the crew abandons this position, the forest road will be cleared instantly. Elite German spearheads will surge through the breach. An enemy shock division will drive straight into the deep rear of the depleted Soviet defenses. Retreat means the inevitable collapse of the entire front. The commander makes his final decision in an instant. Without the slightest hesitation, without unnecessary reflection or doubt. The lives of 4 exhausted tankers mean nothing against the backdrop of the looming strategic catastrophe. They must become live bait, the perfect steel magnet to pin down every available reserve of the enraged enemy. Command, retreat is technically impossible. Vehicle is completely immobilized. Right track is blown. The enemy is rapidly massing heavy artillery and infantry for an assault, Kravchenko states flatly into the mic. Abandon the vehicle immediately. Retreat on foot through the woods. That is a direct order, the radio speaker crackles, escalating into a raspy shout. Command, cannot comply. There is no one else left to hold the road. Staying on position. Calling fire on my own coordinates. Out. With a sharp motion, Kravchenko releases the PTT button. He flips the radio's power switch to off, cutting the conversation short. The decision is final, not subject to appeal. The dialogue with HQ is over, forever. Comms are severed solely on the initiative of the doomed crew. The visceral fear is gone. The exhausting, hollow hope for a miraculous rescue has vanished. All that remains is a cold, crystalline, professional clarity. The natural human instinct for survival is instantly replaced by the absolute, frigid calculation of dead men. The crew voluntarily and consciously transforms their wrecked machine into a death trap for the elite vanguard. They have firmly decided to take as many enemy soldiers as possible with them into the frozen earth. "Load armor-piercing," Kravchenko commands steadily, without a single note of doubt. The loader nods silently. Not a single emotion shows on his face, blackened by ingrained soot. His inflamed eyes are bone dry. No tears, no rising panic. Only a grim satisfaction from a duty flawlessly performed. With a strain, he lifts the penultimate 76mm shell from the floor, which is littered with spent casings. The lethal weight of steel rests familiarly in hands torn to blood. The movement is calibrated to the millimeter by thousands of repetitions. With a dull metallic scrape, the shell slides confidently into the cannon's red-hot breech. "Ready," the loader rasps, spitting dark saliva onto the iron floor. The massive steel wedge drops. The sharp, deafeningly heavy clang of the breech block hits their ears hard. This short mechanical sound puts the final period on their lives. The mechanism of death is cocked for the very last time. The silence in the cramped turret becomes terrifyingly tangible. The driver-mechanic grips the control levers with bloodied hands. The gunner presses tight against the shattered optical sight, cold-bloodedly lining up the lead German anti-aircraft gun. None of the tankers look at each other anymore. Empty words are no longer needed. All necessary orders have been given. All hard decisions have been made, final and irrevocable. The scarred iron box has become an autonomous combat unit, severed forever from the world of the living. They wait in silence for the enemy to close to the range of a sure, crushing blow. The trap for the enemy division has been slammed shut from the inside. The crew has prepared for the inevitable step into eternity. Deep rear. The timber ceiling of the HQ bunker trembles slightly from the continuous explosions of heavy artillery shells. The German artillery prep is ruthlessly churning up the Soviet frontline positions. Damp, cold earth continuously spills from the ceiling onto the spread-out topographic maps. The air is thick with heavy tobacco smoke, the acrid smell of kerosene, and the sour sweat of exhausted men. The general paces incessantly from the crudely built table to the massive radio set. His face is gray from chronic insomnia. Deep, hard wrinkles crease his forehead. Red pencil arrows on the paper show the inevitable tactical catastrophe. The enemy is breaking through the flanks. There are no more reserves. The defense is cracking at the seams. In a dark corner, the radio man desperately turns the stiff ebonite dials. He presses the headphones against his ears until his fingers turn white with pain, trying to fish even one living voice from the front out of the raging sea of static. Suddenly, the speaker spits out a sharp, metallic screech. The crackle of the jammed airwaves breaks. The voice of the heavy tank commander, Kravchenko, breaks through. The voice sounds absolutely calm, a raspy, dry sound, completely devoid of any human emotion. The senior lieutenant simply dictates precise numbers. Coordinates for Junction 17, square by square. The HQ officers freeze instantly. They stop breathing. The silence in the cramped bunker becomes absolute, deafening. Their ears ring. Only the hollow voice monotonically hammers out the coordinates through the roar of nearby explosions. The crew is transmitting data to direct artillery fire onto their own position. In the adjacent compartment of the bunker, the signal's intelligence team intercepts the enemy's open tactical frequencies.
The enemy airwaves are literally boiling with hysteria and blind rage. Elite Wehrmacht commanders are blowing out their voices in guttural screams. They are demanding heavy air support. They are demanding 88mm anti-aircraft guns. They are pulling every available reserve of their shock division toward a single point on the operational map, a blocked forest crossroads, to a single, stationary, heavy tank. The radio translator feverishly writes the text on a crumpled scrap of paper, breaking the pencil lead in his haste. He hands the sheet to the chief of staff. The man quickly reads the translated lines and slowly raises a heavy gaze to the division commander. The general stares fixedly at the operational map. A lone red dot at Junction 17. He instantly understands the tank crew's grim design. The men in the iron box voluntarily refused the order to retreat. They consciously turned their scarred tank into a giant steel magnet. They have pinned down the entire mass of the enemy vanguard. German special forces, surviving medium tanks, infantry squads, heavy towed guns, all crowded around a single immobilized target. The enemy is blinded by primal malice. The enemy has completely lost the critical momentum of the offensive. The trap has snapped shut from the inside. 4 men have tied down an entire shock division. This is the cruel mathematics of war. 4 doomed men against an armada. The general clenches his fists until his knuckles turn white, his nails digging painfully into his calloused palms. The office tension of the headquarters clashes harshly with the high tragedy unfolding over the radio waves. The general is duty-bound to give the most terrible order of his military career, an order to kill his best men to save thousands of other soldiers on the front line. He must saturate this specific square with the densest artillery fire possible, completely destroying the enemy grouping along with the trapped crew. There is simply no other way out. A second's delay means a breakthrough of the front and the inevitable fall of the capital. To the Chief of Artillery, the general's voice sounds hard, like the slam of a breech block. Coordinates for Junction 17, Square 34. Reference point, lone tank. The officers are silent. Everyone present perfectly understands the true meaning of these sparse words. It is a death sentence for their own. Converge every surviving battery in the battalion. Aim according to the crew's data. Wait for my personal signal to open fire. The general cuts. Telephone operators feverishly crank the handles of the induction field sets. The command flies like lightning along copper wires into the deep rear, to the camouflaged firing positions of the last howitzer batteries. The far line, a snow-covered field. Artillery crews, drenched in sweat, rip frozen tarpaulin covers off heavy 152mm howitzers. The frost cruelly burns their lungs. The soldiers breathe heavily, fitfully, steam rolling from their mouths in thick white clouds. The artillerymen work at a frantic pace. Every second counts. They harness themselves to the heavy metal trails, straining their backs from the immense physical effort as they roll the massive guns into direct fire positions. The frozen metal groans at length. The wide wheels crunch through the deep, icy crust. Ammunition handlers run to the wooden shell crates, dragging enormous, high-explosive shells. The metal weighs dozens of kilograms. Muscles creak from the monstrous overexertion. Hands are bloodied against the iced-over iron. The shells land on the loading trays with a dull thud. The breech loaders slam them into the cold chambers. The clang of heavy breech blocks echoes across the snowy field. The guns raise their thick muzzles into the gray, low sky. The gunners feverishly spin the steel hand wheels, setting the pinpoint coordinates. Square 34. Elevation angle set. The crews freeze. The loaders grip the lanyard cords with a death grip. The divisional artillery is fully combat ready. Dozens of heavy barrels are aimed at one specific point. The point where, right now, 4 tankers are suffocating in toxic smoke, tightly surrounded by enraged enemies. In the bunker, the general looks at the black radio handset. He waits. He waits for the very last word from the vehicle commander. When the Germans close in on the side armor, when the ring tightens to the absolute limit, then the crushing blow will be dealt. The game of anticipation reaches its peak. Nerves are frayed. The air in the bunker hums with unbearable tension. All that remains is to wait for the decisive call. The heavy gun recoils. The last 76mm armor-piercing shell leaves the red-hot barrel with a deafening roar. The massive steel wedge of the breech block drops sharply, clangs, and freezes solid. The extractor spits the smoking brass casing onto the floor, which is piled with hot metal. The breech gapes like a hollow black hole. The loader's bloodied hands fall helplessly to his sides. The ammo racks are absolutely empty. The main caliber of the Soviet heavyweight falls silent forever. The enemy instantly reads this ominous, unnatural pause. The enemy's onslaught intensifies manifold. Elite German infantry surge up from deep craters. Gray greatcoats flicker rapidly through the thick gunpowder smoke. The distance closes with terrifying speed. 80 meters, 50 meters, 20 meters. The enemy breaks through right up to the scarred steel hull. A brutal duel of total attrition begins, a duel of blind rage and cold metal. Coaxial!
Short bursts, Commander Kravchenko rasps.
His tone is steady, as if on a training range. The gunner hammers the trigger of the coaxial machine gun. Tracers tear through the gray gloom. Lead ruthlessly mows down the first ranks of the attackers. The belt empties rapidly. The machine gun chokes, spits out the last spent casing, and goes silent. There is no more ammunition. The vehicle has finally lost its heavy armament. 47 tons of cast steel are instantly transformed into a defenseless target for assault groups. The Germans pelt the blind machine with heavy hand grenades. Monstrous impacts shake the hull. Explosions rip open the external fuel tanks. The armor rings continuously from direct hits. Shrapnel viciously lashes the pitted metal. Inside the turret, it becomes unbearable. The air is completely burned out. The tankers greedily gulp down thick, toxic carbon monoxide. Lungs burn with fire at every breath. Eyes water from the acrid chemical soot. The claustrophobia of the steel coffin squeezes their throats. The space narrows to the size of a cramped grave. Fire personal weapons. Aim for the vision slits. Kravchenko's voice is devoid of emotion. It is a dry, mechanical command. The crew draws their sidearms. The heavy slides of the pistols click dryly in the gloom. The tankers press against the narrow firing ports and surviving vision slits. The primal horror of close-quarters anti-tank combat begins. Pistol rounds fly at point-blank range. The shots sound pathetic, unnaturally quiet against the backdrop of the artillery hell raging outside. German soldiers fall directly onto the frontal armor, liberally drenching the vision blocks with hot blood. But there are too many attackers. The assault group completely swarms the stationary tank from all sides. The defensive perimeter is compressed to the thickness of an armor plate. The soundscape of the battle changes abruptly. The roar of cannon fire is replaced by a soul-chilling metallic scraping.
The heavy hobnailed boots of the German infantry confidently stomp across the roof of the engine compartment.
The enemy is aggressively swarming right above the heads of the exhausted crew. Dull, rhythmic blows strike their inflamed eardrums. The Germans frantically hammer heavy entrenching tools against the buttoned-down turret hatches. The metal rings ominously. The enemy methodically searches for vulnerabilities, trying to pry off the steel hinges or find gaps in the armor. Through the thick alloy steel, muffled, guttural screams, distorted by rage, break through.
"Russ, surrender! Come out!"
The enemy's words sound hollow, as if from beneath the damp earth. The hammering of metal on metal overhead is maddening, a monotonous, inevitable rhythm of approaching doom. Every second stretches into a viscous eternity. The critical lack of oxygen causes severe dizziness. The loader slides to the floor, leaning his back heavily against the empty casings. His chest heaves convulsively. The driver-mechanic lies motionless on the steel levers, quietly choking on his own blood under a tight, filthy bandage. The gunner stares blindly into the shattered sight. None of them pay the slightest attention to the frantic shrieks outside. The enemy arrogantly demands submission, hoarsely promising life in exchange for humiliating captivity. There is zero response from the crew. These men crossed the line long ago, where animal fear loses all meaning. The silence inside the turret becomes absolute, dense, tangible. Only the heavy, raspy breathing of 4 doomed men breaks this sepulchral peace. The routine of the end arrives inevitably and mundanely. Kravchenko, slowly, without unnecessary haste, lowers his right hand into the canvas bag. His frozen fingers feel the ribbed cast-iron body of a heavy anti-tank grenade. The cold metal rests familiarly in his bloodied palm. The commander brings the grenade to his chest. The senior lieutenant's gaze is absolutely calm. He looks closely at his men. Short, barely perceptible nods serve as a silent farewell. Kravchenko grips the safety lever tightly. His index finger rests confidently on the steel ring of the pin. One short, extremely calculated movement. The metal pin comes out of the slot with a thin, barely audible ring. The grenade is armed. In the cramped cabin, choked with suffocating powder fumes, a heavy expectation of the inevitable hangs. The safety is pressed tight against his palm. The estimated time to detonation, exactly 3 seconds after release. The Germans continue to hammer furiously with shovels against the iron hatches. The scarred, heavy tank has finally turned into a hollow steel mousetrap. The last switch has been flipped. None of the tankers flinched. The crew silently prepares to take their final, irrevocable step beyond the veil. The enemy completely swarms the stationary hull of the heavy Soviet tank. Dozens of elite soldiers from the assault group scramble over the pitted armor. Hobnailed boots slip on frozen blood and layers of chipped whitewash. Gray greatcoats flicker rapidly through the thick gunpowder smoke. The German infantry is triumphant. They sense the coming resolution. They are confident in their absolute superiority over the broken machine. The blows of heavy entrenching tools against the steel turret hatches merge into a single, deafening metallic hum. The enemy feverishly searches for vulnerable seams. SS soldiers expertly prepare shaped charges, planning to rip open 47 tons of cast steel with an explosion. The enclosed space of the vehicle resonates hollowly with every external blow. The oxygen is completely burned out. Breathing is impossible. The crew is suffocating in the toxic haze. Inside the cramped cabin, an absolute ice-cold calm reigns. Senior Lieutenant Kravchenko slowly overcomes a stiff muscle spasm. His right hand reaches for the power switch of the miraculously surviving radio. A hard click
The speaker immediately spits out the dull hiss of static. The commander brings the black ebonite microphone to his parched lips. Soot is deeply ingrained in his skin. The commander's voice sounds steady, completely devoid of any emotion. It is a dry statement of fact. "Command, I am 07, calling fire on my own position." End of transmission. The final phrase has been sent. Kravchenko calmly releases the microphone. The black PTT button falls onto the floor, which is littered with spent brass casings. The commander slowly shifts his gaze to the heavy anti-tank grenade. The ribbed cast iron is clenched in his right palm. The safety pin has long been pulled. The metal lever is pressed tight against his fingers. On the checkered steel floor beneath their feet, black powder from ruptured artillery charges is scattered, the perfect igniter for the massive blast the combat vehicle has become. Kravchenko takes a brief look at his crew. The loader sits motionless by the empty ammo rack. The gunner leans heavily against the ice-cold breech of the shattered cannon. The driver mechanic lies quietly on the steel control levers. No fear. No goodbyes. Only the exceptional, crystal-clear realization of a mission accomplished. The commander relaxes his numb fingers. The heavy cast-iron grenade falls with a dull thud directly into the scattering of powder. The lever flies aside with a metallic ring. The striker hits the copper primer with a dry snap. The mechanism cold-bloodedly counts down the 3 seconds of the delay. In that same millisecond, the night sky over the frozen forest flares with a blinding white light. A consolidated battalion of Soviet artillery delivers a massive strike on the transmitted coordinates. Dozens of heavy 152mm howitzer shells fall with a monstrous howl exactly onto the crossroads at Junction 17. The events merge into a single, crushing blow. A monstrous internal explosion instantly ignites the remains of the fighting compartment. 47 tons of cast armor cannot withstand the immense pressure. The hull bursts from within. The heavy, multi-ton turret is ripped from the turret ring with a sickening screech of tearing metal. The mangled hunk of steel is tossed high into the air. A massive, roaring pillar of fire erupts from the depths of the tank's hull. At that same elusive moment, the divisional artillery's high-explosive shells saturate the firing position from above. The space of the crossroads ceases to exist in its former state. The camouflaged earthen revetment and the dozens of enemy soldiers on the armor vanish in the epicenter of a continuous blast. The frozen earth shatters into sharp shrapnel. A lethal shockwave uproots centuries-old pines. The elite German infantry is annihilated in a fraction of a second. The dense formation of the enemy shock division, drawn toward the stationary steel magnet, takes critical, irreparable damage. The howitzer shells methodically grind down armored personnel carriers, prime movers, 88mm anti-aircraft guns, and enemy manpower. The firestorm lasts for 15 long minutes. The earth trembles from the continuous hits of the heavy caliber. The crossroads rapidly transforms into one enormous, deep, smoking crater. The trap worked perfectly. The Wehrmacht elite has been ground to dust by Soviet artillery. A cold, foggy morning arrives. Late November 1941. The low winter sun dimly illuminates the aftermath of the night's battle. The temperature holds steady at -30 degrees. The air is crystal clear. A sharp, bitter frost has locked the mangled, damp earth. An absolute, dead silence hangs over the destroyed crossroads. Approaching forward units of Soviet infantry cautiously move onto the line. The soldiers stop at the edge of a giant crater. The scene of the past battle paralyzes the column's movement. The forest is scorched to the ground for hundreds of meters around. The snow has completely evaporated under the influence of the immense temperatures. Black, mutilated clay is exposed, heavily mixed with sharp shards of metal. At the very bottom of the enormous crater lies the dead hull of a Soviet heavy tank, a Kliment Voroshilov one. The thick frontal armor is hideously melted. The hull metal is torn open. The heavy gun barrel has been thrown 20 meters to the side by the blast wave. The machine is completely dead. Around the shattered steel hull, hundreds of frozen bodies of enemy soldiers lie in a dense carpet. The elite German vanguard has ceased to exist. The infantrymen stare silently at the dead hunk of metal. No one utters a single sound. A cold northern wind howls lengthily through the punctured armor plates. The wind blows fine gray ash out of the open turret ring. The mangled metal is frozen solid into the soil outside Moscow. The line was not surrendered.